this microphone. Okay. So I'll just hold this and then I'll hand it off to you. Okay, let's start again. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tim Pratt. I'm the chair of Shoreview's Environmental Quality Committee. And I wanted to thank you for joining us for a presentation tonight on Ramsey County's All Abilities 2050 Transportation Plan. And as I was coming here this evening, coming up Hodgson Road, I've been around a long time to remember when we expanded that road and they built it wide enough to put in 2 lanes of traffic in each direction because they said, eventually, we're going to have enough development that that's what we're going to need. So we're going to stripe it for just 1 lane in the meantime, but we built it big enough. And that was about 20 years ago. And it's still striped for 1 lane in each direction because we didn't need all of that capacity for vehicle traffic. And as I was coming here tonight, I was thinking about that, and I was noticing when I was out on my run today that people were walking, that there were people on bicycles, that there were a young gentleman on an electric scooter, and of course, people in cars. But all of these ways that people were getting around, that we didn't need to have such a wide road built because that didn't meet the needs. And so obviously that leads us kind of into the topic tonight of how we're going to plan for 2050 and what we want to be seeing in terms of the transportation. So I want to introduce our speaker, Scott Merrick, who is a transportation planner with Ramsey County. He has 30 years of experience in public and private sectors with transportation and metro planning. He has a BS and MS degrees from St. Cloud State in public administration and geography. And so, as I said, he's going to be presenting on Ramsey County's 2050 All Abilities Transportation Plan with an emphasis on aspects of the plan that could benefit reduced carbon emissions and more eco-friendly transportation. So, join me in welcoming Scott Merrick.
Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. And I'm pleased to be here this evening to provide you guys an update on the Ramsey County All Abilities 2050 Transportation Plan. Just as kind of a little bit of a primer for those of you that are not familiar with what a transportation plan is. Number one, what we do is kind of set the groundwork for what the existing conditions are for the transportation system. And we just kind of wrapped up that process recently at Ramsey County. So that's looking at things like traffic counts, crash rates on roadways, bike and pedestrian counts, population, employment, just kind of setting that groundwork for what the existing conditions are for the transportation system and what the transportation system needs to support today. Then we also set a strategic vision for what the transportation system will look like in the future and how it will perform in the future. So we're not quite to that point in the process yet, but we will be looking at developing population forecasts, traffic forecasts, looking at what that future vision of the transportation system might look like as between the years 2030 and 2050. And then ultimately, the reason we put a transportation plan together, it's to inform how we invest in our construction program. So that's called the Transportation Improvement Program, or TIP, and that's a document you can find on the county's website. That's the construction program for roads, bridges, transitways, bike and pedestrian facilities. That's a 5-year program, so our county board just recently approved our 2027, our 2023 to 2027 TIP document. So that sets the stage for the construction that's happening this year and then the subsequent years. And of course, the big project in Shoreview right now that everyone's interested in is the Lexington Avenue project. That project is actually moving along quite well, and we expect that to hopefully be open to traffic in early August. A little bit of background for the products that will be in our transportation plan. Again, I mentioned the existing conditions. We're also going to have a social equity section, so that's really looking at the disadvantaged population cohorts in Ramsey County, and making sure that those populations are invested in equally to the other areas of the county. We have a goals and objectives section, so that's looking at things like carbon that we had just talked about, congestion rates, bike and ped connections, safety, making sure that we're meeting our goals in those areas for the future. We also want to have a public engagement process that involves all the people in Ramsey County, all the different population cohorts of Ramsey County to make sure that we're not leaving anybody out. Our plan is going to be performance-based, and by that I mean that we're going to set goals or targets for the future for crash rates, carbon emissions possibly, and a lot of other areas such as pavement condition, bridge condition. A couple of challenges that we're really facing right now in Ramsey County is that we have the highest crash rate of any of the counties in the Twin Cities metro area. We also have the bumpiest or poorest pavement of any of the counties in the Twin Cities area. So those are really two big focus areas along with our all abilities, bike and ped connections. There'll be a financial forecast for the plan. And by that we mean that we're going to set a specific amount of money that we'll have available through the year 2050 that we'll assign to our transportation projects. We're also going to run some scenarios, so some what-if scenarios. What if we did more bike and ped projects? What if we did more pavement projects, more bridge projects? What are the outcomes that we would realize under those different scenarios? So with the finite amount of money, it's sort of a give and take. It's a set amount of money like a pie. So if you do more of one thing, you have to do less of something else. And those are tough decisions that our policy makers need to make, and we're hoping that our transportation plan can help them with those choices. So we already, at Ramsey County, we already luckily have a pretty good baseline of some strategic planning initiatives that we're going to use as a baseline for our transportation plan. We have the Ramsey County Comprehensive Plan that goes out to the year 2040 that sets a lot of kind of foundational base characteristics and expectations for our transportation system. That involves our all abilities transportation policy. It involves building out some major transit ways that you've heard about, like the Riverview Project, the Purple Line Project we've been involved with. The Gold Line Project is under construction right now out to Woodbury. So it's really, our comp plan really sets a heavy focus on transit and bike and pedestrian projects. That's the all abilities element. And then also maintaining the existing systems and obviously safety are some of the main elements of the comp plan that are carried forward into our transportation plan. So a little bit more about our strategic modal priorities. This is something that's pretty unique in Ramsey County that you probably won't see in other counties around the metro area. Our board has set modal priorities that place walking and biking and transit as our top priorities when we design projects. So a lot of times when you have a roadway project, it's usually like a focus on how we can move all the vehicles and the trucks as quickly and safely as possible. And we want to do that at Ramsey County too, but our top priority is first to look at how we can move safely the bikers and the walkers and integrate transit into our roadway projects, and then obviously looking at the roadway element of that as well. And one of the big ways that we do that is through 4 to 3 lane conversions, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in just a minute. So our county board also has our all abilities transportation network policy, and we're fortunate enough to have Connie Bernardi here tonight, our active living manager that leads our All Abilities Transportation policy and works with our community to advance these goals. But what this policy says, I'll just read it real briefly. It's the County Board of Commissioners is committed to creating and maintaining a transportation system that provides equitable access for all people regardless of race, ethnicity, age, gender, sexual preference, health, education, abilities, and economics. So we want to have a transportation that works for people that are age 8 to age 80 is a common way that people say that. We don't want to leave anybody out. We want to make sure that we have the ADA ramps in place, the bike connections, the ped connections, the transit connections. And a big reason that we do this, well, there's a number of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons we do this is because Ramsey County is the most densely populated, diverse county in the state. And we're also the most financially disadvantaged county in the state. So because of those kind of demographic indicators, it's really very critical that we have this approach to our transportation investment. So I just mentioned a little earlier about our modal priorities. This is an example of a project along Maryland Avenue in St. Paul where we took a 4-lane roadway, converted it to 3 lanes with a center left turn lane, and then built in bike and ped connections with that. So we're doing this along many other roadways in Ramsey County as a way to integrate the bike and ped connections, and this is going to be a major focus of our 2050 transportation plan. I mentioned a little bit earlier about our pavement condition in Ramsey County is the poorest of any of the Twin Cities metro area counties. So this is an example of that along Rice Street. Right now we're in the process of building out a 4 to 3 lane conversion along Rice Street just north of the Capitol area from Pennsylvania Avenue up to County Road B in Roseville. And this is through obviously a very urban setting. There's a lot of challenges here with constricted right-of-way, business development on the east and west sides of the road, parking issues. So this is a very good example of how we're trying to transform Ramsey County's transportation system into an all-abilities transportation network. Another big focus of Ramsey County is, as most counties, is bridges. This is an example of a bridge that is actually in the city of New Brighton. It's along Old Highway 8 over the railroad tracks in New Brighton, and it's a fracture critical bridge that we actually had to take Metro Transit's transit route off of the bridge because it didn't have the structural capacity to carry the Metro Transit traffic anymore. And fortunately, in the regional solicitation process through Met Council, we received funding to replace this bridge in the year 2027, but this is another big focus area that we'll have for our 2050 transportation plan. I mentioned a little bit earlier about the focus on regional transit ways in Ramsey County. So this is a map of those major transit way corridors in Ramsey County that we're systematically building out. There's the Rush Line project up there up to 694 in North St. Paul and Little Canada. The Gold Line project here out to Woodbury is under construction right now. Obviously, the Green Line project everybody knows about between Minneapolis and St. Paul is being used for many years now. The Riverview Modern Streetcar project out to the Mall of America is being studied right now from downtown St. Paul out to the Mall of America. And then also a future ABRT line along Rice Street and then down through downtown St. Paul down to West St. Paul is under study right now as well. So these are all major transit investments that are really at the core framework of our transportation strategy for Ramsey County. Again, so a little bit more about our equitable transportation investment. I mentioned earlier that we're the most diverse and financially disadvantaged county in Minnesota. So what we really try to focus on with and try to respond to that is to make sure that your zip code does not dictate the transportation system that you have in Ramsey County. And we take that very seriously, so we make sure that when we put our construction program together every year, we are mindful of equitably investing in all parts of Ramsey County. Some of you probably know or have heard about the I-94 Rethink project between Minneapolis and St. Paul. There was, unfortunately, in the 60s and 50s, there was an investment along I-94 between Minneapolis and St. Paul that MnDOT has sort of apologized for recently, and basically has said that we did not do our due diligence when we invested in I-94 between Minneapolis and St. Paul. We should have been more thoughtful about looking at other options to make sure that we weren't, disproportionately impacting the Rondo community and people in that corridor. And so Ramsey County wants to kind of learn from those previous wrongs and make sure that we're not doing those sorts of things with our transportation investments. A little bit more about multimodal investment. I know that's something that this committee is interested in. So again, Connie Bernardi leads our active living group for Ramsey County and does a lot of great work with our bike and pedestrian plan. We will be integrating our active living bike and pedestrian network into our overall 2050 transportation plan. We will also be looking at gaps in the existing bike and pedestrian system, and then getting input from the public. So if this group or City of Shoreview has concerns about how your bike and pedestrian system operates along county roads and how it connects to the city system or the state system, that is the kind of input that we would like to see during our planning process. And I know that there's one project that your city council, I think it may be considering in early June. Last summer, we worked with city staff on conducting a planning study along Victoria Street for a potential future trail. And so that is one consideration that we're looking at for our 2050 plan, pending input from the Shoreview City Council. And I think, this just talks more about integrating that bike and pedestrian framework into our overall 2050 plan, looking at existing conditions, safety conditions, and this is kind of a framework or network of what that plan looks like. There's more input about looking at how we identify gaps in the system and integrate those into our overall plan. And again, so what some of the questions that we would like you to think about: what is working well, what could be improved, what causes you concern in the multimodal system within Shoreview, and that could also include transit. So is transit working for you well, the Metro Transit fixed route system or the dial-a-ride service? Are those facilities, is that infrastructure working the way that Shoreview needs it to be working today and into the future? I talked a little bit earlier about financial constraints. So there's local, state, and federal funding that we receive in Ramsey County. That has to be balanced with the identified needs, and obviously there's way more needs than there is funding. So there's difficult decisions that need to be made about what projects are in the financially constrained plan and what projects need to be kind of put aside for future consideration beyond the 2050 plan. And so the way that we kind of make those decisions is public input, And then also looking at our performance measures that are in the plan, pavement condition, bridge condition, crash rates. Where are those system gaps for bike and pedestrian facilities? All of that input is collectively considered by our staff and by our our county board in ultimately deciding what projects make it into the plan, along with input from citizens and the 19 city councils in Ramsey County. So again, the scenario planning part of the project will do sort of some what-if scenarios. What if we invest more in transit versus bike ped versus pavement preservation, 4 to 3 lane conversions, bridge improvements? What if we get some additional federal funding or state funding that we didn't anticipate? How would we use those additional resources to advance projects? So we want to be kind of quick on our feet and be ready to respond if there is additional funding. And so we'll run some scenarios as well that looks at maybe 10 or 20 or $30 million of additional federal funding that might be available to us, and then think of ways that we could best spend those dollars. Just to give you a little bit of a framework, today Ramsey County has a construction program for our roads and bridges and bike and ped facilities that's around $30 to $35 million a year. We have a much larger transit program that builds out those major transit ways, but relatively speaking, our program, if you compare it to Hennepin County or some of the other larger geographic area counties in the Twin Cities, we do have a relatively small road and bridge and bike ped construction program compared to some of those other adjacent counties. And again, so at the end of the day, when we complete our process, the goal will be to have a project list from the year 2030 through the year 2050 for roads, bridges, transitways, bike and pedestrian facilities that will be constrained to a certain dollar amount into a short-term time frame from, let's say, years 0 to 10, and then a medium-term time frame from years 11 to 20, and then a longer-term time frame out to the year 2050. And so that project list will then help inform staff and the county board on how to invest in our 5-year construction program. And that concludes my presentation. I think Connie Bernardi may have also had some additional input for the group.
Thanks, Scott, for that great presentation. He's doing amazing work with our county and our community and coming up with this plan. And I appreciate you all inviting Scott to present tonight. And we look forward to your questions and your comments. I wanted to share with you, I'm Connie Bernardi, and I do active living Ramsey communities with our community throughout Ramsey County. And our vision and mission is to engage the community to improve health. And we create and promote environments where people can be physically active in their daily routines. And one of the outcomes of the work that we've done is really focusing on creating environments where people can bike and walk safely. And I'm really proud of working for Ramsey County and for our county board for having this innovative approach to transportation and having it be an all abilities transportation network. I mean, I can't tell you how impressed I am. I kind of say it's beyond complete streets. I love, complete streets, context-sensitive solutions, all those kinds of things, but to plan a transportation system so that you can be safe when you bike or you walk, because we all are pedestrians at some point in our transportation system. And before the people in those transportation modes were forgotten. And I'm very proud of Ramsey County and proud to be a part of it and working with Scott to do this. And one of the things we have coming that I wanted to share with you. Okay, first, before I do that, I want to let you know you're invited to be able to participate in Active Living Ramsey Communities. You can, simple as signing up to our mailing list. You can email, you can go online and Google Active Living Ramsey Communities, and it has our mailing list for our biking and walking team. And we meet periodically on a Thursday if there's things to talk about. So we just had one on Professor Fan from the University of Minnesota. She does research on transportation happiness and equity, and she came and talked about underserved communities and transportation needs. It was very good. And then sometimes we roll up our sleeves and we look at projects that are in front of us and give ideas to the county engineers on ideas we have as pedestrian and bicyclists. And then we also have an active living, and that's from 6 to 8 at night. And then we also have an Active Living Ramsey Communities Coalition meeting, which is quarterly, and we meet on a Monday. The next one is June 26th from 2:30 to 4:30. We've been meeting on Zoom. Seems to be a blessing and a curse because if you get a lot of turnout when people are able to Zoom in. And Professor Fan is coming back, and her presentation was excellent. So I would really encourage you to attend that one. And it's a simple registration, and you can email me. I'm Connie. I wish I had a slide for this. Connie.bernardi@co.ramsey.mn.us. But Active Living Ramsey Community is something to Google. And what I wanted to share with you tonight, we're just about ready to launch any moment now, probably in the next week or so, working with our communications department to get this online. But we are relaunching our Be Active, Be Green bench initiative. Many of you know or have seen the benches along Highway 96, and they say Be Active, Be Green. And the program was started a number of years ago, and it was to create pathways in which people who may not always be active, like people with a disability or someone with young children or an elderly parent, to be able to go bike and walk. And a woman called me and she was like, we need more of these in all over the place. And she's so excited about the program. And she goes, and I need even a break sometimes to rest too. But she really wanted to be able to get her parent out there. So we're going to be working with our local governments and nonprofits in the county. And you can propose bench routes. We provide the free benches. Benches have gotten very expensive, and they're made out of recycled plastics. And we say Be Active, Be Green on them. We have two different options, a Victorian model and a Park Series, we call them. And you plan the route anywhere from 50 feet to a quarter of a mile, ideally, to be able to see the next one to get to it. Can be around a loop around a lake. It can be creating a corridor to a key destination. So there's all kinds of things in which how these can be done. And just collaborate with your, ideally collaborate with your local governmental units, because the part that the grantee fulfills is putting in the concrete pad and maintaining them and entering into the contract to do that. And just really feel free to reach out to me. Happy to help in any way that I can, and would love to be a part of it. So our coalition, you can simply get our emails and learn about, I try to cull through the information of things that are relevant for biking and walking and active living in our community. And you're also welcome whenever you can pop in or pop out to our meetings and gain some information that's relevant to you in your lives. So thank you very much for having us tonight.
Microphone back to Scott, and now is the part for all of you folks. If you've got questions, I will come around with the microphone since we're recording today.
I have two questions. The first is, how was traffic impacted when you go from 4 lanes to 3 lanes? Does that cause congestion?
Right, great question. So it depends upon the level of traffic that's on the roadway. There are guidelines, and I don't have the numbers here with me this evening, but There are guidelines for what traffic counts would work well for converting a road from 4 lanes to 3 lanes. And if the traffic count is over a certain number, I want to say it's like around 18 to 20,000. If it's over that amount, it can be challenging to convert a roadway from 4 to 3 lanes, but we do sometimes still try to do it. I think the other part that we think about is that if there's a little bit of congestion and the result is that we have more transit ways and safer and more connected bike and pedestrian connections, then that's generally a trade-off that Ramsey County supports, as long as it doesn't create any really dangerous situation that isn't safe for the vehicles, which is generally not the case. But for the most part, most of the roads, or many of the roads in Ramsey County that are 4-lane have been looked at to be converted to 3 lanes, and there's actually a traffic study that we did across the entire county that looked at what roadways would be good candidates to be converted from 4 to 3 lanes. And I think there was about 10 or 15 corridors actually in Ramsey County that were identified as good candidates. And so we are systematically working through a process of building out those corridors from 4 to 3 lanes.
And then are the bike lanes respected with no barriers between the bikes and the cars?
That's another good question. Bike lanes, bike lanes work well for people that are probably more advanced bicyclists and more kind of comfortable in their own skin and biking with traffic and in heavier traffic conditions. So it's really kind of a matter of the person that's using the facility should feel comfortable in using it. And sometimes the environment that we're working in kind of restricts what type of facility we can consider. In a perfect world, we would have a bike trail and a sidewalk on either side of most county roads. That's obviously not practical financially, and then also from a impact perspective, there would be so many impacts to properties. That's not a practical thing that we can consider. But when there is an opportunity to do that, to build the separated bike trail and a sidewalk, that's what we prefer to do. And like we're doing that right now along Rice Street for our future Rice Street project north of the Capitol. But yeah, there are those urban areas where a bike lane is really the only practical option to give bicyclists some safety. But you are definitely correct, ma'am, that driving in a bike lane is really not something that some people are comfortable with doing.
Just big picture, if people have an interest in keeping track of this over time and participating, what's the best way to do it? I know it's pretty easy to Google, but it'd be good just to highlight where people can go to keep up with what's happening. Yeah,
thank you, sir. So I just wanted to talk about this real quickly. So we do have a project website for the project. If you go into Google and just type Ramsey County All Abilities 2050 Transportation Plan, just type that into Google. It will take you to this website. This website has information about our existing conditions report that we just completed. So that talks about traffic counts, crash rates, pavement condition, bridge condition, all kind of the main kind of metrics of how our existing system is operating. There's also a video on the project website towards the bottom of the page that basically it's a Transportation 101. What is a transportation plan? It's about I think it's a 3-minute video. It's really quick and it explains to people, to the general public, what a transportation plan is and what the value of that is for a county such as Ramsey that's investing in our transportation network. So I would encourage you to go to this website, check it out. We're right now about 6 months into an 18-month study process. We've hired a consulting firm that's helping us work through that process. So the plan will be wrapping up around this time next year. Right now our focus is working on the goals and objectives and performance measures that really set the investment strategy for the plan. But yeah, there'll be opportunities on this website as well for future public meetings and ways to engage in the overall process.
So at the end of that 18-month period, will that actually be the point where you have individual projects identified and prioritized over time that
Yes.
the county would look to implement?
Correct.
Excellent.
Is that okay? Should I just ask them in succession? The first question that I have was, when I look at this and when you're evaluating where your greatest opportunities are you looking, I look at some of the larger transportation lines for public transit, and for example, the one that would go from downtown, the Riverview one, obviously getting people to the Mall of America or that area from St. Paul. But when I also look, how are you kind of prioritizing those lines, but also your other, the walkability and the biking? I mean, you could go, how do you prioritize, for example, do you look at the streets and say, we've got an opportunity here, the pavement's bad, there are people here who do not have access to cars or don't have the financial, so they would be high on the list? Because there's obvious routes, right, to get people from, the North Metro down to St. Paul, but I wondered how you prioritize those other routes within the city. And I'll just give you an example. Here in Shoreview, we don't have a great demand for public transit. We have people asking about it all the time, but the line that we do have, they're utilized not much. But I look at some of the opportunity that if you went over to Rice Street, where you're building out, I can't remember which line that is, that might be an opportunity for someone to bike over. So, we may not have a critical need, but maybe in St. Paul proper you would, or getting people to Roseville from St. Paul to work. So how do you prioritize those types of things?
Right, yeah, great question. So I guess maybe the simplest way to say it, it's a little bit like baking a cake. So there's a lot of different ingredients that go into baking a cake. And that's kind of a simple way or a simple analogy for about how we prioritize our transportation projects. So it's a little bit about geographic equity, making sure that all portions of the county are invested in. And then it's about some of the things that I talked about in my presentation. It's about making sure that those disadvantaged population cohorts are not left behind. It's about state of good repair, so making sure that the system that we currently have is safe and in a reasonably good condition. So our bridges, our pavements, our signal lights, our crosswalks, our sidewalks, our existing bike trails, making sure that all of that existing infrastructure that's part of the existing assets of the county is in a relatively good condition. And so once we get kind of that taken care of, then we can look at doing additional things like the 4 to 3 lane conversions that I talked about, where we're providing additional opportunities for bikers and walkers in transit and providing a safer environment by getting those left turns out of the through lane and into a center left turn lane. So we also do talk to each of the communities, each of the city public works directors, city engineers, city planners, and we get a lot of good input from the city staff about what they're seeing, what they're hearing from their constituents, from their councils, and we use that input to put the plan together along with public meetings like this evening. And so it's just kind of a combination of all of those things, and then ultimately, at the end of the day, Our staff then makes a recommendation to our Public Works Director, Brian Isaacson, who then brings a recommendation to the Ramsey County Board of Commissioners, and they probably will make some tweaks and ask some questions and make some adjustments about different priorities that we're recommending, and that will ultimately end up in what is our transportation plan that will be financially constrained. And that's really the most difficult part of the plan. It's not putting the priority list together. It's really taking that project list and then saying, we only have 250 million or whatever the number is, and whatever is beyond that is really not going to be within the 50-year vision of the plan unless we get additional resources through grants that we might get from the state of Minnesota or from the federal government. But yeah, that's the really tricky part, is determining what's in that financially constrained plan and what's outside of that plan.
Okay. The second question I had, when I was looking at this, I kept thinking about the state of, for example, St. Paul streets, which are awful and have been awful. If you've driven them lately, they're atrocious. So how does this fit in? For example, I had heard they were going to do, either they were looking for a sales tax or something to fund some of that. But how do you kind of achieve this, but you don't want to necessarily own the city street maintenance, but some of those roads, including Summit Avenue, for example, I know there's a controversial bike lane proposed there, which makes sense. But how do you kind of align with that? So they're taking responsibility or covering the costs of the necessary road repair, and kind of keep it separate but aligned. I mean, I'm sure you're talking with them, but.
Sure. So Ramsey County does actually have a maintenance agreement for maintaining county roads in the city of St. Paul. And so I don't remember the exact dollar amount, but we pay the city of St. Paul every year to do routine maintenance on Ramsey County roads. And this particular spring was worse than most. I think you've all experienced that with the heavy winter that we had and the thawing. So we actually partnered with the city of St. Paul above and beyond the funding that we give them to help us maintain our county roads. We sent our own public works crews out to supplement the city of St. Paul crews to fix our county roads in the city of St. Paul, just because there were so many potholes. And we've gone through, I think it's about a 6-week process where it's basically been all hands on deck. Our public works staff have been out in the field filling potholes from basically sunrise to sunset. And we just had an update last week at our all staff meeting for public works, and our maintenance supervisor said that one day last week was the first day in like 2 months or about a month and a half that he didn't have a call on our hotline for potholes that said that there was a pothole somewhere. So we kind of feel like we've caught up, knock on wood, and not to say that there isn't a little bump here or there, but most of the really bad pothole situations and corridors on our county roads have been rectified for the summers. But certainly if you see or hear something that needs to be addressed, let us know.
Okay, because I wasn't just talking potholes, but just, yeah,
Okay.
overall pavement. And the other is just a quick question. And when you talk about Ramsey County being the most financially disadvantaged, I think was that the term you used? How are you measuring that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So that's basically saying that in general, the income levels or the property tax base of Ramsey County is one of the lowest in the state. So we don't get a lot of property tax revenue. The value of the housing stock in Ramsey County is on the lower end. There's a lot of basically people that don't have a lot of means in Ramsey County. And so that, that brings challenges and opportunities for Ramsey County. And we're looking at it as an opportunity on how we can diversify our investments in a multimodal transportation system that will respond to those needs, basically.
Well, I don't see any more questions. So, Scott, we wanted to give you a little thank you gift here. There's a
Oh,
card.
well, thank you very much.
And a cutting board from Wood from the Hood, naturally sound trees from the city of Minneapolis.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening, and glad to answer any future questions that your group might have.
All right. And this is a reminder, this is the last installment of the speaker series for this year. So if there are topics that you want to see for next year's speaker series, reach out to the Environmental Quality Committee. Talking about websites, go to the City of Shoreviews, shoreviewmn.gov, and search for the Environmental Quality Committee. And there's an email for Krista Billerbeck, who's our staff person there, and you can send her those ideas. So with that, we'll conclude. And why don't we thank Scott and Connie for the presentation.
Thank you.